We're back
We're back.
on a Monday morning
Yep.
to talk about Rule 6 from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And Rule 6 is set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Wow.
Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. So it's a very simple, uh, let's say, rule. It's a very simple rule, but it's again very, very deep in
Yeah,
what he means by this.
absolutely. It reminds me of that phrase that says, when you point a finger at someone, there's always three fingers pointing back.
Yep.
Same thing.
Or that even that biblical one where it says, before you tell the guy he's got a splinter in his eye, remove the log in yours.
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing. But yeah,
For sure.
but this chapter to me had a pretty dark theme, pretty dark topics, because he's talking about people that basically lose hope in the future.
Right.
And it's something that you bring up a lot. You always say, because we talk to people and we try to be optimistic,
Right.
and you always say, but we can't lose hope. That's something you've always said,
Right.
but we can't lose hope. And Jordan Peterson brings up different individuals that lost faith in humanity and took that and did bad things and damaging things with it. He talks about some school shootings. He talks about
Yeah, Sandy Hook and Columbine and how
oh,
dark that is. Why would they do something of that nature? And it's because they were apparently somehow hurt and they want revenge. I'm going to take as many people as I can with me. That
right,
type of thinking.
yeah.
He labels it as evil, you know?
And he goes into, like, I guess I don't know if it would be their memoirs or some of the shooters and things like that, and what they were actually writing about. So it's very dark. Um, but I wanted to bring up, because I'm always thinking, where do I see this in our lives? Because that's how it pertains to us, and maybe, you know, other people as well. And one of the things that hit me was that he talks about the abused many times becomes the abuser, um,
Correct.
but not most of the time. And I thought that was pretty powerful because um, situations happen. Some people use those situations and they actually see that's not the way they want to live their life,
Right.
and they choose a different path.
Correct.
Um, in our lives, there was a big, big trauma to your mom when she lost her father.
Right.
She was 12 years old.
Hmm.
And one of the things that was very clear to me growing up was that grandma, your mom, reacted one way. Her sister, your aunt, who was older, reacted another way. The same situation happened to both of them. They both lost their father, and they had already lost their mother, so they were now orphans.
Right.
Grandma, your mom was 12 years old, and her sister was maybe 6 years older or 8 years older. I don't
I think
remember.
she was 16 or 17, 4 or 5 years old.
But grandma, your mom, took it and said, we got, I mean, we have to work, we have to survive, we have to get ahead. But your aunt, Tia, on the other hand, was a little bit more maybe delicate,
Fragile.
fragile, and the younger sister had to almost take care of the older sister and look out for her,
For sure. No,
for sure.
almost. She did. She had to because the my aunt fell apart. She had a nervous breakdown. And so my mom had to take over and um it lasted all their lives actually. All
She
their
she
life.
always cared for her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As I grew up, I began to realize that. When you're a kid, you don't know anything. Or, you don't realize what is going on and what has transpired because of things that happened in the past. later on you start hearing stories and you put things together and
Right.
you see the character of the people. My mom was always taking care of my aunt, and that happens a lot.
Yeah.
One of the things, and you're right, this thing has a dark tone, but we're going to put a good light to it
Absolutely.
because that's what he does too,
He does.
you know. But one of the things that was extremely interesting to me, and this guy's got facts. He reads statistics and this and that, and he's a clinical psychologist, and he's one of the, I guess, best minds around of our time. He said, abusers, they were most likely abused, but one of the things that they do not do often is they do not abuse their own children. And he says this can be proven factual by mathematics. He says, look, if one person that was abused had three children and he abused those three children, then on the next generation it would be 9, then 27, then 81, okay? And then it exponentially grows. So he says by the time you get to 20 generations, it would be 10 billion people that would have been abused. And that's way more than it even exists today. So he says it is a proven fact, mathematically, that this is
The,
not happening.
the majority do not. Or I don't know about the majority, but yeah, I guess most of them do not.
Do not. They will end up abusing somebody else. But he says, look, this is the proven fact mathematically of the dominance of good over evil.
Interesting.
Super.
Yeah.
Every time I read something in this book, I learn. I mean, I read
Yeah.
this book, in parts before, but now I'm going through it thoroughly, like,
Yeah.
for the podcast and stuff. And that was like mind blowing to me.
It is because because a lot of who we are is things that have happened to us in life, especially early on and things like that. That's why kids, which was the previous chapter, he's talking about children.
Yeah.
It's so important how they're raised, how we raise them and all that. But somebody who, let's say, was abused and chooses to live another life, somebody who had an alcoholic parent and chooses to live another life, somebody who saw, let's say, evil and said, I'm not going to continue that to the next generation.
Correct.
That's, I think, what he's focusing on
He
in this
is.
chapter, because he brings examples up first of those who chose to live that life. They
Right.
saw evil and they lived evil, mass murderers and things like that. And then,
They want revenge and they continue on that road.
but one of the examples he gave of the opposite was the gentleman that wrote the Gulag Archipelago.
Archipelago.
Archipelago. Um, that gentleman, he went through the worst of the worst with, I guess, the gulags, and I'm not too familiar with it, but the Soviets and um, was
Yeah, it's so the Gulag Archipelago, I've read excerpts of it throughout my life. Essentially what it is, it's a gentleman that gets arrested, beaten all up, and thrown into a prison camp, a Russian prison camp, and they were horrible. Okay? And what ends up happening, according to Jordan Peterson, is that the gentleman looks at himself and says, what did I do in my life to deserve this? And then he begins to realize some of the things that he had done way early on, like he was pro communist and so forth and so on. And he says, well, I brought this on to myself. And so what he ends up doing in the prison camp is he says that he starts taking himself apart piece by piece and then putting himself back together again. And he uses him as an example because he writes this book and he says he writes the book with the tremendous force of the unvarnished truth. Okay?
Yeah.
And I find a tremendous amount of motivation in that because he says, look, he says, one man, this guy, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, I don't know how to say the last name too well, but Solzhenitsyn, some. He says, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, one man decides to change his life instead of cursing his current fate, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And he shakes the communist government to its core
Because of
by
the book.
writing this book.
Right. So he affects society.
Yeah. And so this is extremely motivating for me because you have no idea how many times in our businesses I've come across people and they've convinced me that say, what can I do with my vote? What I'm just one person. What can I possibly do?
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to change the world. It's just me thinking a little bit differently. And he's saying here, and he's giving the example that Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you know, he wrote the book, the Gulag, what is it,
A
Gulag?
gulag.
The Gulag Archipelago, Gulag Archipelago, okay? And he says, look, he shook the communist regime to its core. And apparently that book became extremely famous. And then um,
Banned.
it was banned in Russia,
Yeah.
but somebody took it upon themselves to write it and take it out clandestine kind of thing,
Yeah.
hiding in a way and take it out to the West. And
It's apparently a huge book.
I'm gonna read it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I I had that book. I don't know where it is anymore. I have to buy a new copy of it, but I'm gonna read it fully this time because I used to read excerpts of it,
Yeah.
and it's brutal. You got to be in the right frame of mind because um, you can
Yeah.
get taken down by this if you don't have a clear vision of what they're trying to say, which is one person, one man, or one woman can change many things in the world
Right.
and not feel that you're just one vote. What it, what do I do?
Yeah. And the reason that um he brings that gentleman up is because he's using his as an example, and Jordan Peterson is saying it starts with yourself. It
Mm-hmm.
goes back to you got to get yourself in order, and this gentleman went through like a huge analysis of his whole life and every step, I guess. I haven't read the book. I haven't read that one.
Right. No, I haven't fully read that either, but he says, he takes himself apart
Hmm.
and then puts himself back together again.
Takes responsibility. One thing that's interesting is that in biblical stories, natural disasters occur because of decisions that were made by the people. The people were living a bad life according to God, so you have the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
The people were living a bad life, Sodom and Gomorrah, so you have these huge destructions. I don't remember if it was fires or what.
Yes, a fire.
Uh, you got Noah's Ark, again, the flood that wipes out all the civilization. But the theme is that the humanity was lost, and so God had to come in and
Clean it up.
clean it up. Now, one thing that I thought was very interesting, because that's taking responsibility for even a natural disaster. And Jordan Peterson brings up that you can prepare for a natural failure. This is a quote from the book: failure to prepare. Um, Actually, this is not a quote. These are just a note I put. I put failure to
Okay.
prepare versus simply blaming an act of God. I sent you an interview which I thought was very interesting. It was of the current president of El Salvador, Bukele,
Okay.
and he was being interviewed by Tucker Carlson.
Mm-hmm.
And in the interview, Tucker saying, "What can we do?" Like, because clearly society is on its way. down. Our democracy is on its way down. That's what Tucker's saying. Bukele agrees, and he says, "Well, we're not maintaining this democracy." According to Bukele, and I thought it was interesting because it went exactly with what Jordan Peterson says here: failure to prepare, failure to maintain. If you're not maintaining something, it's going to get destroyed. And Bukele brought up an example of a wall. When you put up a wall, if you don't maintain that wall, it's obviously going to, but that
Collapse.
wall can stay there as long as it's being maintained. And he's saying with democracy, there are too many things, and I don't want to get too much into that. But the point is that he's taking responsibility for the down, the collapse,
Well, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he in the beginning he was all pro-government, communism and stuff, and so he
socialism,
socialism. He blames himself for that. That's the part that he's taking responsibility for, and
right?
then he goes on to say one of the most important quotes of the book,
Of the Gulag archipelago.
the Archipelago. It says, "Bless you, prison, for having me in my for being in my life.
Jeez.
Bless you, prison, for being in my life." So he goes up to, I mean, think about that for a sec. Because this man was beaten, this man was in prison, arrested. Then he ended up getting cancer. I mean, his life couldn't be worse. Couldn't be worse. I grew up in Cuba, and I went through some things, and it's a walk in the park compared to this guy. And if it it puts things in perspective,
Yeah,
and it makes you realize you better be grateful for what we have in this country, the good old USA. You know,
yeah.
um, there's um there's a video that's gone viral on social media where this lady is in another country, and she's filming this guy, and the guy is they're doing something. I don't know what it is. Maybe they're doing something they're not supposed to do, and the guy says, "Hey, no filming here." And she goes, "Oh, I'm exercising my Second Amendment rights and this and that and whatever." And he goes, "What, you think you're in
Oh,
America?"
First Amendment, First
Oh,
Amendment.
First Amendment rights. And he goes, "You think you're in America?" And he goes up to her and he punches her in the
Oh
face.
man,
So, the things that we can do here, it's a
it's a
double-edged sword.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but when you compare, and we were
Oh,
talking with our good friend last week about he wanted to teach his kids to value things. He wanted to teach his son to value things, so he took him to Mexico, and they did gift baskets to the very very poor areas,
yeah.
and these kids, 5 years old, 4 years old, you see them, struggling to carry that gift basket to back to their home. And his son saw that contrast of his son has many luxuries like we have here in the United States, yet look at how they live in other places, and it makes you appreciate
Oh,
more, and try to help. Like you said, maybe you can make an impact. Maybe the little things that you do make an impact.
absolutely. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I'm going to take that from this chapter because, like you say, it's brutal, right?
It's dark.
Yeah. So one person that has a goal in mind that sticks to that kind of moral compass, and tries to do, let's say, the right thing,
Yeah,
they can change the world. That's what he's saying. One person can't.
yeah,
Because this guy wrote a book that,
yeah.
created a tidal wave.
Right.
And so he single handedly, even with all the hardship that he went through, he turned it into good.
Yeah.
And so that's one good point to talk about. Then the other thing that I wrote down that I thought was interesting, because this chapter is super interesting. He says, Abraham, you know, became the patriarch for the Hebrew people in the Old Testament, and they made a contract with Yahweh. And he says, it was a great man leading people, and they became a society, and then they became an empire. But As fortunes rise and success rose, he said that greed and pride and arrogance took root, and so did corruption. He says corruption showed his ugly head. So, as you trying to grow as a society, and you your fortune increases, and your success increases and so forth, then your ego gets in the way, and then you have greed and pride and arrogance. And so what he's saying is, you gotta keep an eye on it. You gotta keep a watch on it, so that when greed, you know and corruption show their ugly head, you just chop it off. It's very interesting, because
Yeah.
it seems like, the old saying that power corrupts. And so you just have to, it's like the time that he had a some kind of presentation, and he says, you never think of yourself, if you were living during the Nazi times, you don't think yourself as an evil Nazi. You think yourself as the one that was going to save Anne, uh
And Frank.
Anne
Oh, if you
Frank.
would have been living in that time, yeah.
Right. And he says, well, guess what, sweetheart? You're not that good. You would probably be one of the Nazis that was killing people. And so he's saying, keep yourself in check, so that you don't fall into this abyss. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think we're all capable of. eh, I think he says, you're okay, unless you keep it in check, you're all capable of doing very ugly things.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about how do you, I mean, you were sharing with me the other day that you were at a point in your life where, you felt you were not walking on water, but you felt like you were at the top of your game, let's say, at that point, and then you got humbled.
The Lord,
The-
the good Lord, yes,
yeah,
humbled me.
you got humbled, and then um and so you learned that lesson, right? This was earlier on in your life and career. Um
Yeah, so for the public, I lost everything, and we had to come back. I had to come back again. The second time around, you're a different man. You make you do you don't make the mistakes that you made before, you know? Here he also says that people become obsessed with power, and corruption takes root. How do we keep this in check? And the answer that he gives is, take responsibility for your own failures.
yeah.
You know, take He says, how about this? Why don't you do this? Take small steps towards improvement. Not huge, small steps towards improvement.
I like that.
Become responsible for your own failures.
Yeah.
In my particular case, I lost everything. And it was very difficult. And it humbles you and
Did
makes you
you
think twice and three times about what's important in life, really. Because when you lose everything,
Yeah,
and I'm talking about at this moment material things,
right.
you lose your friends that were with you there, and you realize who's your friend and who isn't. And so it's the same story that a lot of people,
When that happened, do you remember how you felt? Were you blaming some of the decisions you have made? Were you blaming maybe certain people in your life, circumstances? Like a lot of people, especially you and I are in business. I don't know how many people I've heard say, I was here and then 2008 happened. So to me, that, and then when they go into it a little bit, some of these people blame the circumstance of 2008 for the loss of all of their wealth. Let's say I had 10 properties and then 2008 happened. So you were one of many. I was 18 at the time, so I wasn't in the game too much yet, but you were one of many that lost because maybe over leveraged, whatever the case, right? And you had too much debt, you lost those properties. What about the people that were able to keep those properties? in 2008.
So just to clarify to you and our family,
Yeah.
2008 was not when I lost everything.
Right, right, right.
It was prior to that.
Yeah, this was yeah, no,
Okay.
but I'm just
And just for the record, the only people that were left was my family. My mom, my dad, and my aunt. There was nobody else.
yeah.
Your mom was there too. That's it. Everybody else ran for the hills because when you're on your way down, even the people that want, and this, I think this is golden. Not because I'm saying it, because I felt it and I've heard it said many times, and I saw it happen to me. When you're on your way down, okay, even the people that want to help you are afraid to help you because if they give you a hand, they're afraid that you're going to take them down with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're on the way down, it's think of it like an elevator that's going the line broke and you're going down 100,000 miles an hour. Nobody's going to be able to stop that until you hit bottom, wherever that bottom is. It's lower for some, maybe not so low for others. You're going down
Hmm.
and there's nothing stopping it. The way up is different. The way up is steps
Right.
and it's slower. Okay,
It's
there are
not a
no
free
steps
fall.
on the way down. You're on free fall.
Yeah.
So the second time around that I came around, okay, I climbed slowly.
Maybe
When
safer.
2008 hit, I was ready for 2008.
Yeah.
I saw the diminishing of my, whatever I had bought properties and my down payments were like blown out. I mean, I lost them all, but I was able to maintain the property because that's my second time around.
Mm.
So I was more careful. So 2008 did not affect me like what you're hearing everybody else say, oh, I
Right.
lost everything. That wasn't the case with me. It was very scary. It got real bad.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
But you were prepared, and so
because I failed before.
failure to prepare,
Right.
right? And so the people that say 2008 happened, and this
And
is
I
just in
lost
general,
everything.
yeah, it's blaming the circumstance,
Right.
but one could also say, well, what about the failure to prepare?
Well, I'm no better. When I lost everything, I blamed other people too.
Other people, circumstances, I got mixed up with the wrong people,
Instead of taking responsibility for
right?
myself,
And Jordan Peterson saying,
take
look at what you
responsibility.
did.
Look at
Yeah,
what you did.
yeah,
And he's right because as I look back, and you know the old saying, hindsight is 2020,
yeah.
as I look back,
You
I made
could have,
really bad decisions.
yeah, and
I
I,
got involved with people that were not professional and all they wanted was to, you know, take money from you or whatever. I was working extremely hard to make a buck
mhm,
and many hours and I was grinding, okay?
yeah,
But I got to
you made mistakes.
made
and
mistakes.
and see, the only way to learn from them is to take responsibility and say, hey, you know what, I could have done this better
But I was blaming everybody and their mother.
initially.
Yes, and it's a growth period that I think people go through.
Yeah,
Um, if you can read books, it's all in the books.
I
If
think,
if you can
but
absorb the books, you can read some books, all these books,
I think books are great, but I do think you need to live something.
Sure,
Sometimes you gotta live it.
I
So look,
agree.
I'll give you an example.
No, I agree.
I have on my calendar the day that um I went to this appointment. It was in LA. It was on a Saturday. So I go to this appointment, I knock on the door, and they don't answer the door. And I had set up the appointment earlier in the week. And I say, "Man, these people, they forgot about the appointment, this and that." Initially, I blamed the other people. And then on the way back, headed home, and I missed an event with my family. I remember and on the way back home, I remember thinking, you know what? I'm never going to let this happen again. So I'm going to take responsibility. I didn't say I'm going to take responsibility, but what I did was I said, it's my fault. I didn't confirm that appointment.
Oh, you didn't confirm.
I didn't confirm it
Oh,
the day before or the morning of or
right,
whatever the
right,
case.
right, right.
So I implemented a new process that I won't go to an appointment unless I confirm. And that's a new thing that's something I've been doing for years now. And it's worked for me. And I don't go to the appointment if they don't confirm.
Mm-hmm.
And it hurt me to go on that Saturday and knock on that door and them not answer. It really hurt. That's what I'm saying.
You have to go through it.
You have to go through that pain sometimes.
Yeah, well, yeah. Pain teaches you.
It teaches you, and then
Oh,
you
yeah.
implement something because you realize. And anytime I would lose a sale, I wouldn't close something. I blamed myself. What could I have done better? Why did I lose that opportunity? You know, I always blame myself. And I remember you and other people telling me, no, it's not your fault. They just went with somebody else. No, you know, they didn't choose me. They didn't go with me. I didn't stay in front of them enough. I wasn't good enough. And that's the way that one improves, I think. I mean, I'm not perfect by any sense in that, but I think that if you put the blame on yourself, why didn't I get that opportunity? Instead of blaming the circumstance.
Well, there's that old Chinese proverb that says, um, the man that blames others for his misfortunes has a long way to go. The man that blames himself for the misfortunes is halfway there. And the man that does not blame anyone has already arrived. So ultimately, and I've heard,
That's interesting
yeah,
because that's
that's
like a step beyond. That's saying maybe it's just destiny. It's just the way things are. You don't blame, you just
just
live,
move on,
you move on.
move on.
Yeah, that's
There's
interesting.
another,
Learn
Jordan
from it.
Peterson said, huh?
Learn from it, but move on.
Learn from it for move on. So if you're blaming people, what the Chinese proverb is saying, you got a long way to go,
It's
man.
interesting.
You
Yeah,
got a long way to go.
I agree.
You are in denial. This thing happened to you because of you.
Right.
So it's like the Michael Jackson song, Look in the Mirror, the man in the mirror. You want to change the world? Start with the man in the mirror, right? Because you're not, and that's what Jordan Peterson is saying. You're not better than anybody else. He says, well, so don't think so, sweetheart. You're not that good. You're not, your soul is not so intact. You're potentially can do as much bad as anybody else if the circumstances are there,
Mhm.
you know? And so and then the other one is, if you blame yourself, you're halfway there. But if you don't blame anybody,
Right.
you know, you have arrived.
Yeah.
Um, but it's a tremendous chapter. I mean,
Yeah. Yep. And removing habits you know are wrong.
clean up your life.
Clean up your life. I really like that. I like this is a quote from the book. Do only things you can speak of with honor. Can you imagine if all throughout our day that's how we lived? Yesterday we were talking about, was it yesterday? Yeah, a situation because it was in business and it was something shady that was kind of being done in real estate, and we thought, I remember thinking, I remember telling you, yeah, but if you do that, you are gonna have to, that person eventually is gonna find out you didn't have their best interest
Oh,
in mind.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And then you said, that's right. And and then you quoted a movie, right? Where the person says, you know who's gonna know? You're gonna know.
Oh,
You're gonna know that you didn't have the person's best interest in mind. Oh, that
Kenji.
Kenji from the Colombian Japanese gentleman.
Right, right. The thing that the occasion was that he was driving late at night and he comes up to a red light, but there were no cars in all the other stops. It was a four-way street. But there was a car next to him, and it happened to be his father. And he says he put the window down and he tells his dad, "What are you doing?" And he goes, "I'm stopping. I'm waiting for the green light." And he turned around and he, but there's nobody here. You can go. And then the dad got upset and he says, but I am here. I know I'm not taking a red light because then I have to answer to myself. And that's his Japanese side of the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, you hold yourself to a higher standard. He's talking about, say things that make you strong, like
Mm-hmm.
affirmations. I always thought that affirmations sometimes are, I'm good, I'm this, but you know what? Say things that make you strong. Don't don't blame this person or that person, you know. Don't blame the left or capitalism or this or that. Just, you know, he says your ancestors were smart enough and life is too short for you to figure it out on your own. Look at what your ancestors have done and try to learn from what they did and the mistakes they made. He
Mm-hmm.
says life is too short for you to try to figure it out on your own. You know, it's brutal. It's very interesting.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a really good message towards the end of the chapter where he's just saying these are the things you can do to just improve slightly your
One
current
step at a time,
situation.
a
Yeah.
little bit at a time,
Little
and
by little unravel, tell the truth. He's saying, you're going to little by little begin to realize it's like something taken off of your shoulders into a certain extent because you're lying. You're not being honest, and so you're having to live with that every day. Start doing the difficult thing of just being honest with people, and your day is going to go smoother. you know
yeah.
so I think
He also talks a
uh-huh.
little bit about living in the present. You know, try to live in the present, and as you move forward to, because he's talking about try to figure out what makes you tick. What is your, if you can find your purpose, let's say in life, uh, and work towards it, that's an admirable goal. And you can work a little bit at a time. And then what ends up happening is that unbeknownst to you, the people around you are also affected. They see who you are, they see how you carry yourself, that you're
Hmm.
trying to do good for your fellow man. And there was another law that he says, God forbid you try to do good for your enemy. That's far too advanced for you at this point.
A rule, yeah.
So it's very interesting, man. I mean,
Yeah, I think really it has a really good message, and yeah.
set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
Yeah, and so fix your own situation.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a good message,
I think so. He says at one point, if your house is not in order, how can you run for office and try to run a country? If your house is a mess, how can you
Yeah,
even,
how dare you
how dare you,
try to
you,
fix the
you want
world?
to be a chief of a village? How
Yeah,
dare you? If your hut is all messed up, fix yourself first, and then maybe you can aspire to, you know, fix your village.
right.
Yeah, it's cool. It's really,
Yeah, yeah, because especially like social media and on many platforms, a lot of what is shown, especially it depends what algorithm you're in, is things that are wrong with society, with government, with the world, with certain, this party, that party, whatever the case. It's a lot of pointing all the wrong. But this message is about a again, personal responsibility, fixing
correct.
your own situation first, because it is easy to fall into, especially around election time. This happens, seems, now I've gone through a few elections, presidential elections of the United States, and it gets very divisive
Yeah.
and a lot of attacking. But this is a message of, yeah,
Hope.
don't focus on all that stuff. Focus on yourself.
Yeah.
of
And
hope. Yeah.
as you change yourself, you change life, because he's giving you examples like Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Right.
You
Right.
know, the
Yeah.
Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah.
I mean, the word, what is it? The word is mightier than the sword. And so
The pen is mightier than the sword.
the
Yeah.
pen is mightier than the sword. So, you know, by changing yourself, you change everything around you. And the other thing that I got out of this that is extremely important is try at all cost to avoid becoming cynical.
Yes.
Don't be
Pessimistic.
cynical. Yeah, don't be,
I
because you lose and everybody around you loses too.
I looked both of those words up because this chapter is about avoiding that.
Yeah.
Pessimism, a tendency to see the worst aspect of things or believe that the worst will happen, a lack of hope or confidence in the future. And cynicism, an inclination to believe that people are motivated purely by self interest. Skepticism, and then it's actually a school of ancient Greek, the Cynics. So, um, and I think pessimism might be a philosophy as well. Yeah, avoid those things. Keep hope in humanity, in your fellow man, right?
Yeah.
Trust but verify.
Trust, but and you need a sense of humor. Like last night, we were watching something, and we'll be done. Um, there's this gentleman who's works in a hospital, and he's been very nice to a lot of people. And all of a sudden, he gets ill, and then he has to he gets admitted to the hospital, but everybody in the hospital knew him because he worked there, and his room was full of balloons. So the CEO of the hospital was also a friend of his, comes in and he says, "Look, there was only one balloon left. All the balloons are here in your room." And he goes, "You know, I know for a fact that if I got sick, half the people in this hospital would pop up a bottle of champagne." And the guy that's on the bed says, "Why? The other half don't drink?" Like 100% would be happy, right? And it was a joke because they were longtime friends. Um, and that's another thing you must keep, your sense of humor. If you can, extremely difficult because when you're losing everything, you're not going to have a good sense of humor, I guarantee you. And you're going to try to figure out a way out somehow as quickly as you can to stop that free fall. And but a little humor every now and then, if you can, you
it
know,
it's a form of medicine.
it is. It is.
It makes you forget for a moment and just
Yeah.
take it light.
And I had to, as I was reading this chapter, I walked away from it a couple of times to try to digest things and come back.
Yeah.
So good luck reading this.
Yeah. So we'll end with that.
All right.
Um, Rule 6:
All right.
set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.